Please, she whispered, her split lip trembling as blood trickled down her chin, staining the white lace of her wedding dress crimson. He'll kill us both if you don't leave now. I should have turned my horse around right then and ridden back up my mountain. Should have minded my own business like I had for the past 8 years. But something in those desperate green eyes, half swollen shut from fresh bruises, held me frozen in that dusty church doorway. Before we embark on this incredible journey together, I have a small heartfelt favor to ask. Please subscribe to my channel, give this video a thumbs up. It costs you nothing but means the world to me. And let me know in the comments which beautiful corner of the world you're watching from. Your support truly makes all the difference. You his property yet? My voice came out rough, unused to speaking. She shook her head, wincing at the movement. Ceremony hasn't finished, but Dalton won't. The crack of a fist against bone cut her words short. She crumpled against the wooden pew, and that's when I saw him. The groom, still in his fancy suit, raising his hand for another blow. I didn't think, didn't plan, just moved. 30 seconds later, Dalton Mercer lay unconscious on the church floor, his nose bent at an angle God never intended. The preacher had fled, the handful of guests scattered like tumbleweeds in a storm, and this broken bride was staring at me like I'd just torn down the gates of hell itself. Can you ride, Ba? I asked. She nodded, then grabbed my arm with surprising strength. Her next words came out in a desperate rush, and what she told me changed everything I thought I knew about minding my own business. He's not just cruel, she breathed, her fingers digging into my sleeve. He's the one who murdered your brother 3 years ago. I have proof. The world tilted. My brother, Daniel, found dead in a canyon, officially ruled an accident. But I'd never believed it. How do you know about my brother? The words felt like gravel in my throat. Because I was there. Her swollen eyes met mine. And if we don't leave right now, I'll die before I can tell you the truth. Behind us, Dalton groaned, starting to wake. Men's voices shouted outside, his ranch hands no doubt. I had maybe 30 seconds to make a choice that would either get us both killed or finally give me answers I'd been hunting for 3 long years. You know that moment when your whole life pivots on a single decision? When everything you've become, every scar, every silent year, every reason you've hidden yourself away, suddenly demands you step back into the world you abandoned? That's where I stood in that dusty church, looking at a woman whose wedding dress was more blood than lace. My name's Jacob Thorne, though most folks in these parts just call me that mountain man, if they bother to call me anything at all. 42 years old, haven't spoken more than 10 words a day since my brother died, and hadn't set foot in town for nearly a year before today. I'd only come down because I needed salt and ammunition. Simple errands that should have taken an hour. Instead, I'd walk past the church just as the screaming started. Move! I yanked the bride to her feet, catching her when she stumbled. Up close, I could see she was younger than I'd first thought, maybe 25 or so, with auburn hair falling from its pins and freckles dusted across her nose. Pretty, even with the bruises, especially with the fire still burning in those green eyes despite everything. My bag, she gasped, pointing to a small carpet bag near the altar. It has the evidence. I grabbed it with my free hand and half-carried, half-dragged her toward the back door. The church had been built against the hillside, the rear exit leading straight into a narrow alley between buildings. My horse, a big roan gelding named Ghost, was tied at the rail 30 feet away. Stop them! Dalton's voice, thick with rage and blood, echoed through the church. That's my wife! She ain't your wife yet, I growled, though he probably couldn't hear me. We burst into the alley. Late afternoon sun hit us like a fist, the September heat still fierce despite the season turning. I could hear boots pounding behind us, at least 4 men, maybe more. Can you mount by yourself? I asked the woman, already knowing the answer. Her left arm hung useless, possibly broken. I'll manage, but she couldn't. When she tried to lift her foot to the stirrup, her face went white and she nearly collapsed. No time for gentle. I grabbed her around the waist and threw her into the saddle like a sack of grain, then swung up behind her. She cried out, couldn't help it, but bit down on the sound. Hold on to the horn and don't let go. Ghost needed no urging. He'd been in tight spots before. We exploded from that alley in a cloud of dust, scattering chickens and startling a dog into frantic barking. Behind us, men shouted. A gunshot cracked, wild, not aimed, just meant to scare or alert others. The town of Redemption, Colorado wasn't much. Maybe 200 souls, 3 saloons, 1 church, and a whole lot of false hope. It sat in a valley between 2 mountain ranges, the kind of place where folks came to disappear or to prey on those who'd disappeared. I'd been in the former category until about 5 minutes ago. Now I was riding hard with a bloodied bride and a revelation that might finally explain why my brother died. The woman swayed in the saddle, barely conscious. I wrapped one arm around her waist to keep her from falling, the other hand guiding Ghost toward the mountain trail that led to my cabin. It was a hard ride, 2 hours of steep switchbacks and narrow passages, but it was the only place I knew we'd be safe, at least for tonight. Stay with me, I told her as we hit the edge of town and started climbing. Don't you dare pass out until you tell me about my brother. Daniel Thorne, she murmured, his name carried away by the wind of our passage. He was trying to help me. That's why Dalton killed him. My jaw clenched so hard I thought my teeth might crack. 3 years. 3 years of not knowing, of suspecting, but never proving, of the sheriff telling me it was an accident while I knew in my bones it wasn't. Who are you? I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know. Knowledge meant involvement, and involvement meant the kind of pain I'd spent 8 years avoiding. Clara Morrison, was supposed to be Clara Mercer in another 5 minutes. She laughed, a broken sound. Guess that's not happening now. Guess not. We rode in silence after that, Ghost's hooves finding purchase on the rocky trail with the confidence of long familiarity. Behind us, I could hear the pursuit starting. Horses, shouts, the unmistakable sounds of men organizing a hunt. But they wouldn't follow us up the mountain, not today. Dalton Mercer might own half the valley and have the sheriff in his pocket, but even he thought twice about mountain trails at dusk. Too easy to get ambushed, too easy to lose your way, too easy to end up as wolf food. Tomorrow, though, tomorrow they'd come. Clara's head drooped against my chest, and I felt the tension leave her body as consciousness finally slipped away. I tightened my grip, adjusting my hold so she wouldn't slide, and pushed Ghost a little faster. Whatever happened next, whatever truth this woman carried in that carpet bag, whatever vengeance or justice or closure I might finally find, it would have to wait. First, I had to keep her alive. The cabin came into view just as the sun touched the western peaks, painting everything gold and crimson. It wasn't much, just 4 rooms of rough-hewn logs I'd built myself, chinked tight against winter winds. But it was mine, and more importantly, it was invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. Nestled in a small meadow surrounded by pine and aspen, with a creek running cold and clear nearby, it had been my sanctuary for 8 years. Now it was about to become a fortress. I dismounted carefully, keeping Clara balanced in the saddle until I could lift her down. She stirred as I carried her inside, murmuring something I couldn't make out. Easy, I told her, kicking the door shut behind us. You're safe now. The interior was sparse, a stone fireplace, a rough table with 2 chairs, shelves holding supplies, my bedroll in one corner. I laid her on the bed and lit a lamp, then really looked at the damage for the first time. It was bad. Her left cheek was swollen purple, eye nearly shut. Her lip was split in 2 places. Bruises circled her throat like a necklace. Handprints, I realized with cold fury. Her left wrist sat at a wrong angle, definitely broken. And those were just the injuries I could see. The wedding dress, once fine white silk and lace, was torn and filthy. Blood had dried brown across the bodice. Whoever this Dalton Mercer was, whatever he'd done to my brother, he deserved worse than the broken nose I'd given him. I fetched water and clean cloth, then stood there like a fool, uncertain. I could set bones and stitch wounds, had done both plenty of times on myself and on injured animals. But this was different. This was a woman, unconscious and vulnerable, and I was a stranger who'd just kidnapped her from her own wedding, even if that wedding had been more beating than ceremony. Clara, I said, loud enough to rouse her, I need to clean these wounds and set that wrist. It's going to hurt. Her eyes fluttered open. Well, one eye, the other was too swollen. For a moment, she looked confused, frightened. Then memory returned and something like relief crossed her face. "You're really him," she whispered. "Daniel's brother. You look like him." The words hit harder than I expected. "You knew my brother well?" "Not well enough to save him." Tears leaked from her good eye. "But I'll tell you everything after." She looked down at herself, at the ruined dress and the blood. "Could you help me out of this? I can't. My arm." "I should have thought of that. I'll cut it off, easier than trying to pull it over your head." She nodded, and I fetched my knife. The blade was sharp. I kept all my tools sharp, and I worked carefully, cutting through the fabric from neck to hem without once touching her skin more than necessary. Underneath, she wore a simple chemise and petticoat, also blood-stained but intact. "There's a trunk over there," I gestured toward the corner. "My wife's clothes. You're about her size." The words came out flat, automatic. I didn't talk about Sarah, hadn't said her name out loud in 5 years. Clara's eye widened, the observant kind of woman who caught everything despite her pain. "Your wife?" "Dead, 6 years now. Fever." I turned away, busying myself with heating water. "There's a flannel nightgown, that'll be warm, and a dress for tomorrow if you need it." I heard her move behind me, the rustle of fabric and soft gasps of pain. When I turned back, she'd managed to pull on the nightgown, though it hung loose on her frame. Sarah had been bigger boned, taller. This woman looked like a strong wind might carry her off. "Let me see that wrist." She extended her left arm, teeth already gritted. The break wasn't compound, thank God. No bone through skin, but it was definitely fractured, swollen to nearly twice normal size. "This is gonna hurt like hell," I warned. "I'll be as quick as I can." "Just do it." I'd set bones before, knew what I was doing, but knowing didn't make it easier when she screamed. A short, sharp sound she cut off almost immediately by biting down on a leather strap I'd handed her, and the bone went back into place with a click I felt more than heard, and I splinted it quickly with thin wood and strips of cloth. "Done," I said, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Keep it still and elevated. Should heal clean in 6 weeks or so." She nodded, panting, tears streaming down her face. But she didn't complain, didn't ask for sympathy, just sat there, trembling while I cleaned the cuts on her face and lip with whiskey-soaked cloth. "You'll have scars," I told her, "the lip especially." "Good." Her voice was fierce despite the pain. "Let them be a reminder." While I worked, I found myself studying her face, not the bruises, but the woman beneath them. Strong chin, straight nose, those green eyes that had probably been bright and full of life before today. She had the look of someone educated, refined even, not the typical frontier woman. "You're from back east," I said. It wasn't a question. "Boston. My father was a professor at Harvard." She winced as I dabbed at the cut on her cheekbone. "I came west 2 years ago to teach school in Redemption." "And Dalton Mercer?" Her face hardened. "Dalton Mercer owns the biggest ranch in 3 counties. He owns the sheriff, the bank, and half the businesses in town. When he decided he wanted a wife, he chose me. I didn't have much choice in the matter." "You could have run." "To where?" She met my gaze with that one good eye. "He has men everywhere, and I had a reason to stay, to wait for the right moment." "My brother." "Your brother." She took a shaky breath. "I need to show you something." In my bag, the leather journal. I fetched the carpet bag I'd grabbed from the church and pulled out the contents. A few items of clothing, a small purse with maybe $10, and a leather-bound journal worn at the edges, filled with neat handwriting. Clara reached for it with her good hand, then stopped. "No, you read it. Page 43. That's where it starts." I opened to the page she'd indicated and began reading by lamplight. What I found there made my blood run cold. The journal belonged to Dalton Mercer himself, and it contained a detailed accounting of every illegal deal, every bribe, every threat he'd made over the past 5 years, including one entry from 3 years ago that described, in cold clinical detail, how he'd arranged my brother's accident because Daniel had discovered Mercer was systematically stealing from the Territorial Land Office. My hands shook as I read. My brother, my kind, honest, too trusting brother, had stumbled onto corruption and paid for it with his life. The rage that filled me was an old friend, one I'd worked hard to bury. I'd spent 8 years on this mountain specifically to escape that rage, the kind that made men do stupid, violent things, the kind that had gotten me dishonorably discharged from the army after I'd beaten a fellow soldier half to death for what he'd done to a Lakota woman, the kind that Sarah had been slowly, gently helping me control before the fever took her. Now it roared back to life, hot and sharp as fresh, forged steel. "Where did you get this?" My voice came out barely above a whisper, but Clara flinched anyway. "He kept it in his office safe. I've been working as his bookkeeper for the past year. That was his condition for courting me, that I manage his accounts, keep his records straight." She laughed bitterly. He thought having a respectable Eastern lady on his arm made him look civilized, legitimate. What he didn't count on was that respectable Eastern lady being smart enough to crack his safe and copy his journal. I looked at her with new respect. That took guts. That took 18 months of planning. She shifted on the bed, cradling her splinted arm. I knew what kind of man he was within a week of meeting him, but I also knew that running wouldn't solve anything. He'd just find another woman to terrorize. Or worse, he'd keep getting away with stealing land, bribing officials, and, her voice broke slightly, and killing good men who got in his way. So you decided to gather evidence. I decided to destroy him. The fire in her eye would have been beautiful if the context weren't so grim. I made copies of everything, documents, letters, this journal. I have it all hidden in 3 separate locations: Wells Fargo office in Denver, a lawyer in Colorado Springs, and the editor of the territorial newspaper in Pueblo. I stared at her. This wasn't just brave, it was brilliant. Insurance. Exactly. If anything happens to me, those copies get released. Dalton Mercer gets exposed for what he is, loses everything, probably hangs for murder. She met my gaze steadily, but I needed one more thing. What? A witness. Someone who saw what happened to your brother. Someone who could testify in court that it wasn't an accident. She paused. I found him 3 weeks ago, a ranch hand who'd been there that day, who'd helped Mercer stage the scene. He was dying of consumption, wanted to clear his conscience. He gave me a sworn statement. My heart hammered. Where is this statement? In my bag, sewn into the lining. I practically tore the carpet bag apart, found the hidden pocket, and pulled out a folded document. It was exactly what she'd said, a detailed confession, signed and witnessed, describing how Dalton Mercer had paid 3 men to ambush my brother on a mountain trail, beat him to death, and throw his body into a canyon to make it look like a riding accident. The words blurred as I read. My brother's last moments, described in cold detail, how he'd fought, how he'd called for help, how he'd died slowly, broken and alone, while his killers watched and waited to make sure he was really gone. I'd thought I'd cried all my tears for Daniel years ago. Turned out I had a few more. "I'm sorry." Clara's voice was soft. "I know this doesn't help. Knowing doesn't bring him back." "No." I carefully folded the document and tucked it away. "But it means his death meant something. Means you risked everything to get justice for a man you didn't even know." "I knew him a little." She looked away. "He was kind to me. One of the few men in redemption who didn't treat me like property or a curiosity. He used to come to my school and fix things. Broken window latches, loose floorboards. Never asked for payment, just smiled and tipped his hat and told me to have a good day." That sounded like Daniel. Always helping, always kind, always seeing the best in people until it got him killed. "Why today?" I asked. "Why try to escape at your own wedding?" "Because today was supposed to be my last day alive." Clara's voice went flat. "Dalton told me last night that once we were married, once I was legally his property, he was going to have an accident arranged. Something quick and tragic. Maybe I'd fall downstairs or get kicked by a horse or eat something that didn't agree with me. He was very matter-of-fact about it." Ice ran down my spine. "Why tell you at all?" "Because he wanted me to know I'd lost, that all my planning and scheming had been for nothing. that he'd figured out what I was doing, didn't know about the copies I'd made, but suspected I was collecting evidence. She shuddered. He hit me for the first time last night, said it was practice for the honeymoon, said he was going to enjoy breaking me before he killed me. The rage pulsed harder. And the wedding this morning? He wanted it done fast before I could run. Had the sheriff round me up at dawn, brought me to the church under guard. When I tried to object during the ceremony, tried to tell the preacher I was being forced. She touched her swollen face gently. Well, you saw what happened next. Then I showed up. Then you showed up. Something that might have been a smile ghosted across her split lip, like an answer to a prayer I didn't even know I'd said. Daniel's brother, the one person in this territory who'd have as much reason as me to want Dalton Mercer dead. I don't want him dead, I said and meant it. I want him hanged, legal, public, with everyone in the territory watching him dance at the end of a rope. Clara nodded slowly. That's why I kept gathering evidence instead of just shooting him, though God knows I was tempted. His gun cabinet is right next to his safe. We sat in silence for a moment, the lamplight flickering, the mountain night settling cold and quiet around us. Somewhere outside, an owl hooted. Ghost shuffled in his shelter, probably wondering why dinner was so late. They'll come for us, Clara said finally. Tomorrow or the day after. Mercer won't let this go. I know. We should leave. Get to Denver or Colorado Springs with the evidence. Find a federal marshal who isn't on Mercer's payroll. Can't, I gestured at her injuries. You need at least 2 days of rest before you're fit to travel. That wrist needs to stabilize, and you've got a concussion based on how your pupils look. Push too hard now, and you'll do permanent damage. She bit her lip, then winced. So we wait here? Hope they don't find us? They won't find us if I don't want them to, but we can't just wait. I stood, moved to the window, checked the darkness outside. We need to get word to those places you sent evidence. Let them know what happened. Make sure they release those documents if we don't check in. How? Dalton controls the telegraph office. There's another way. I turned back to her. 3 hours a ride east, there's a mining camp. Small operation, but they've got a telegraph that connects to the main line through a different route. If I leave before dawn, I can get there, send the messages, and be back before anyone knows I'm gone. And leave me here alone? Fear flickered across her face. You'll be armed. I'll show you where the weapons are, how to bar the door. No one's getting in here unless you let them. I paused. But I need you to write down exactly what needs to be sent, and to who. She nodded, wincing at the movement. My head's spinning. I'm not sure I can write clearly. Then tell me. I'll write it down. For the next hour, she dictated while I transcribed 3 messages, each carefully worded, each designed to trigger the release of evidence if certain conditions weren't met. It was meticulous, clever work. Whatever else Clara Morrison was, she was sharp as a tack. You should have been a lawyer, I told her when we finished. My father wanted me to marry one. That bitter laugh again. Guess I should have listened. But I should have known marrying for safety just trades one cage for another. I left before dawn, when the mountain was still draped in that peculiar darkness that comes just before the world wakes up. Clara was sleeping fitfully, her good hand curled under her chin, her breath coming in soft, pained gasps. I'd left her my spare rifle and both revolvers, along with strict instructions to shoot first and ask questions later if anyone tried the door while I was gone. The ride to the mining camp took closer to 4 hours than 3. Ghost was tired from yesterday's hard run, and I had to move carefully through the mountain passes in the pre-dawn darkness. But we made it just as the miners were beginning their day shift. The camp was called Hope's End, which pretty much summed up the prospects of anyone desperate enough to work there. Maybe 40 men scratching out a living from played-out silver veins, living in tents and shacks, eating beans and hardtack, dreaming of the big strike that would never come. But they had a telegraph, and more importantly, they had an operator who didn't care what messages he sent as long as the fee was paid in silver. I transmitted Clara's 3 messages, paid double to make sure they went out immediately, and was back on Ghost within 20 minutes. That's when I spotted the dust cloud in the valley below. Riders, maybe a dozen, heading up the mountain trail toward my cabin. They'd found us faster than I'd expected. Much faster. I urged Ghost into a run, taking risks on the narrow trail I'd never normally take, my mind racing. Clara was alone, injured, probably still sleeping. She had weapons, yes, but could she actually use them in her condition? Could she even get to her feet fast enough if they broke down the door? The cabin came into view just as I heard the first gunshot echo across the meadow. My heart stopped. I drove Ghost harder, emerging from the tree line to see what I'd feared. 8 men surrounding my cabin, firing at the windows. Dalton Mercer himself sat on horseback behind them, his face bandaged from where I'd broken his nose, watching the assault like a general observing a battle. They hadn't broken in yet. The door and shutters held firm. I'd built them from double-thick planks for exactly this kind of situation, but it was only a matter of time. I had maybe 30 seconds before they spotted me. 30 seconds to make a choice that would determine whether Clara and I lived or died. So I did the only logical thing. I charged straight at them, rifle out, screaming like a demon. The men scattered in surprise. They'd been so focused on the cabin they hadn't posted a lookout. My first shot took down the man trying to light the cabin on fire. My second shattered the shoulder of another. Then I was in among them, using Ghost as a weapon, letting his hooves do damage while I swung my rifle like a club. "Thorne!" Mercer's voice cut through the chaos. "Stand down or we burn it with her inside." I wheeled Ghost around, panting, to find Mercer pointing a pistol at the cabin's roof. One of his men held a lit torch. "Do it and I'll kill you," I said flatly. "Not today, maybe, not tomorrow, but someday when you're not expecting it, I'll put a bullet through your skull." Mercer laughed, actually laughed. Bold words from a man outnumbered 8-1. 7-1, I corrected, glancing at the 2 men I'd put down. "And you're forgetting the woman inside has 3 loaded guns and clear shots at all of you from those windows." As if on cue, a shutter cracked open and rifle bearers emerged. "That's far enough," Clara's voice strained but steady. "Next man who moves gets a hole in him." Mercer's smile faded. "Mrs. Mercer." "Miss Morrison," she corrected coldly. "The ceremony never finished. Means I'm not your wife, not your property, and definitely not obligated to listen to a damn word you say." "You little—" "Careful." My voice dropped to a growl. "I've already broken your nose. Be a shame if something worse happened." We stood in tense silence, the mountain wind whistling through the pines, the morning sun climbing higher. It was a standoff, pure and simple, and someone was going to have to blink first. Mercer blinked. "This isn't over," he said, yanking his horse's reins. "You think you can hide up here forever? I own this territory. I own the law. By tomorrow, there'll be a warrant out for your arrest. Kidnapping, assault, maybe murder if I decide one of these boys didn't make it. And I own evidence of every crime you've committed in the past 5 years," Clara called back, "including the murder of Daniel Thorne. Kill us, and it goes to 3 different newspapers and a federal marshal. You hang either way." Mercer's face went white, then red. "You're bluffing." "My, want to test that theory?" Her voice was pure steel. "Or do you want to ride back down this mountain and start running, because that's your only real option right now?" For a long moment, I thought he might call her bluff, might order his men to rush the cabin, might try to burn us out, despite the threats. Desperation and rage warred across his face. But ultimately, self-preservation won. "Let's go," he snarled at his men. "We'll handle this the legal way. Sheriff will have them in jail by week's end." They rode off, taking their wounded with them, leaving only disturbed earth and spent shells as evidence they'd been there at all. I waited until they were out of sight before dismounting and rushing to the cabin door. "Clara, you all right?" The door opened, and there she stood, pale as death, swaying but with my rifle still gripped firmly in her good hand. "Did I do okay?" she asked, then promptly fainted into my arms. Turned out Clara had fired off all 3 guns during the attack. Not at the men, but at the ground near their feet, and the recoil from my heavy rifle had nearly torn her injured arm out of its socket. "Stupid, brave woman," I muttered, as I laid her back on the bed and checked her splint. Miraculously, the wrist was still properly set, though the swelling had increased. Could have done permanent damage, but I didn't. Her voice was weak but defiant. And they're gone. For now, I poured water, helped her drink. Mercer meant what he said. He'll make this legal somehow. Get a warrant, bring a posse, maybe even federal troops if he can manufacture the right kind of lie. Then we run. You can't run, not yet. Look at you, you're barely conscious. I sat heavily in the chair by the bed. We need a different plan. Clara's eyes drifted shut, then opened again with effort. What kind of plan? That was the question, wasn't it? I'd spent 8 years avoiding exactly this kind of situation. Complicated, dangerous, requiring me to think more than 3 moves ahead. I'd come to this mountain to simplify my life, to reduce it to basic elements. Hunt, fish, chop wood, sleep, repeat. No complications, no attachments, no reasons to care what happened in the valley below. Now I had a half-dead woman in my bed, a murderer who wanted us both gone, and evidence that could hang one of the most powerful men in Colorado, if we could just survive long enough to present it. We need allies, I said finally. Someone Mercer doesn't control. Someone with the authority to arrest him before he can arrest us. Good luck finding that person. He owns the territorial judge, the sheriff, not the army. The idea crystallized as I spoke it. Fort Carson is 3 days' ride south. There's a colonel there, William Hartley, served under him during the war. He's honest, doesn't tolerate corruption. Clara's eyes sharpened. Would he help us? He'd help me. I saved his life at Shiloh. I'd spent the past 8 years trying to forget Shiloh. The blood, the screaming, the way bodies piled up like cordwood. But if those nightmares could serve a purpose now, so be it. He owes me. He'd listen at least. And he'd have the authority to put Mercer in custody pending a federal investigation. 3 days. Clara looked at her splinted arm doubtfully. Can I even ride that far? Not yet. Maybe in 4 or 5 days if you heal well. I stood, paced to the window, checked the empty meadow. But we don't have 4 or 5 days. Mercer will be back sooner. So you go alone. Her voice was quiet but firm. Take the evidence to your colonel. I'll stay here hidden. Lock myself in if anyone comes. No. It's the only way. No matter. I turned to face her. You think I'm leaving you here alone after what just happened? After Mercer already found this place once? After you nearly passed out holding a rifle? Then what do you suggest? Good question. What I suggested was probably insane, probably impossible, but it was the only option I could see that kept us both alive and free. We need to slow Mercer down, I said, and make it impossible for him to move against us quickly. And we need leverage, something that forces him to back off long enough for us to get to Fort Carson. I already told you the evidence I've hidden isn't enough. It'll destroy him eventually, but right now, today, he doesn't believe you've really distributed it. He thinks you're bluffing. I leaned against the wall, thinking hard. We need proof, visible, public proof that the evidence is real and spreading. Clara sat up slowly, wincing. The newspaper in Pueblo. It's only a day's ride from here. If we could convince the editor to publish at least part of the story. Too risky. Mercer probably has men watching all the towns. Then what? I grabbed paper and pencil, started sketching a rough map of the territory. The telegraph messages I sent this morning. They went to Denver, Colorado Springs, and Pueblo, right? Confirming my situation and authorizing release of materials if I don't check in again within 7 days, Clara confirmed. Good, but that's defensive. We need offense. I tapped the map. There's a circuit judge coming through this territory next week. Judge Harrison, he's federal, answers only to Washington, and I'd bet my last dollar Mercer hasn't bought him. If we can get the evidence to him before he reaches redemption, he'll issue warrants for Mercer instead of us. Clara's face lit up despite the bruises. But how do we reach him? How do we even know where he is? We don't, but I know someone who might. I grabbed my coat. There's a woman in Redemption, widow named Martha Cassidy, runs the boarding house where traveling judges usually stay. She's honest, doesn't care for Mercer, and she knows everyone's business in 3 counties. You're going back to Redemption? After what happened? Clara looked horrified. They'll arrest you on sight. Not if I'm careful. And not if I go tonight after dark. I checked my rifle, made sure it was loaded. Martha's boarding house backs onto an alley. I can get in and out without being seen if I'm smart about it. This is too dangerous. What if, what if we do nothing? I met her eyes. Mercer won't wait. He'll come back with more men, or he'll burn the cabin from a distance, or he'll get that warrant and bring the loan down on us. We're running out of time. Clara was quiet for a long moment, her face troubled. Finally, she nodded. All right, but promise me something. What? If it goes wrong, if you get caught, don't tell them where I am. Let me take my chances on my own. That's not happening. Jacob, the use of my first name caught me off guard. She'd been calling me Mr. Thorne or nothing at all up until now. If you get caught, I'm already dead. She continued quietly. But if you don't tell them where I am, I might be able to get away. Might still be able to finish what I started. Your brother deserves that much. She was right, and I hated it. Hated that we were in a situation where we had to plan for failure. Hated that this brave, broken woman had gotten dragged into my family's tragedy. Hated that my brother had died trying to do the right thing, and now we were scrambling just to prove it. I won't get caught, I said, instead of arguing. I'll be back before dawn with information on where Judge Harrison is. Then we'll figure out the rest. You're very confident for a man walking into a trap. I'm very motivated. I moved to the door, paused. There's beans and cornbread in the larder. Water in the bucket. Don't try to stand unless you have to. If anyone comes while I'm gone, shoot them, I know. She managed a small smile with her split lip. I'm a quick learner. I believed her. This woman had spent 18 months planning to take down one of the most dangerous men in Colorado. She'd cracked safes, copied evidence, arranged backups, and nearly got herself killed at her own wedding rather than give up. Whatever else Clara Morrison was, she was a survivor. Redemption at midnight was a different creature than redemption by day. The respectable folk, merchants, families, churchgoers, were locked safe in their homes. The streets belonged to drunks stumbling between saloons, prostitutes working their trade, and gamblers making bad decisions by lamplight. Perfect cover for a man who needed to move unseen. I'd left Ghost tethered a mile outside town and come in on foot, using the creek bed that ran behind the buildings. It was cold, muddy work, but it kept me out of sight. Martha's boarding house sat on the eastern edge of town, recognizable by the lace curtains in the windows and the painted sign proclaiming, "Clean rooms, Christian values, no spirits." The back door was unlocked. Martha always left it open for late arrivals. I slipped inside, moving quiet through a dark kitchen that smelled of bread and coffee. Voices drifted from the front parlor, guests probably playing cards or just talking to kill the evening. Martha's private room was on the ground floor, tucked behind the kitchen. I knocked soft but firm, not loud enough to carry, but enough to wake her if she was sleeping light. The door opened a crack, and a shotgun barrel emerged. "State your business or lose your face," a woman's voice said calmly. "It's Jacob Thorne, Martha. Need a word." The barrel lowered and the door opened wider. Martha Cassidy was 60 if she was a day, with iron gray hair pinned tight and that missed nothing. She wore a practical nightgown and had clearly been reading by candlelight, a Bible set open on her bedside table. "Jacob Thorne," she looked me up and down. "Heard you kidnapped Dalton Mercer's bride and broke his nose in church. Whole town's buzzing. Sheriff's offering $50 for information on your whereabouts." "Is that all?" I'm insulted. "You should be dead, not insulted." She gestured me inside, closed the door and locked it. "Mercer's got 20 men looking for you, says you assaulted him, stole his property, meaning the girl, and are probably holed up in those mountains you love so much." He's not wrong about the last part. I kept my voice low. But the rest is lies. Clara Morrison was being beaten at her own wedding. I intervened. "She came with me willingly." Martha snorted. "Clara Morrison is the smartest woman in this territory. If she ran off with a mountain hermit instead of marrying the richest rancher in 3 counties, she had good reason." She poured water from a pitcher, handed me a cup. "What do you need? And make it quick. I've got a judge staying here, and if he catches you, there's not much I can do." My heart jumped. Judge Harrison? He's here already? Arrived this afternoon, holding court tomorrow for local cases, then moving on to the next town. She studied my face. Why? What's your interest in the judge? I need to get evidence to him, evidence that Dalton Mercer murdered my brother 3 years ago, and that Clara Morrison has been gathering proof of it for 18 months. Martha's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. That's a serious accusation. It's true, Clara has Mercer's own journal, documenting the murder and about 50 other crimes, plus a sworn confession from one of the men who helped kill Daniel. And where is this evidence? Safe. Copies in 3 different locations, with instructions to release it if anything happens to Clara or me. I set down the cup. But we need the judge to see the originals. Need him to issue warrants before Mercer can manufacture charges against us. Martha was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then, Judge Harrison is honest. Everyone knows it. He's also cautious, won't move without solid proof. And he's got the sheriff eating out of his hand right now, telling him Mercer is a pillar of the community and you're a dangerous criminal. Can you get us an audience with him? Privately? Maybe, but not here. Too many eyes, too many ears, and Mercer's men are watching the boarding house. Saw them lurking across the street earlier. She moved to the window, peered through a gap in the curtains. There's one out there now, in fact, pretending to be drunk but watching too close. Then I'll leave the way I came. And walk right into the other 2 watching the creek bed? I don't think so. Martha turned back to me. They're not stupid, Jacob. They knew you'd come to town eventually, and they're watching every approach. So what do you suggest? She smiled, sharp, satisfied. I suggest we be smarter. Judge Harrison is leaving at first light, heading to the mining camp west of here for a few days of hearings. That's public knowledge. What's not public is that he's planning to stop at Pine Creek Station to water his horses. It's a small way station about 2 hours west, just a barn and a well, mostly abandoned. How do you know this? Because I asked him his route and he told me. Judges love to talk about their circuits. Makes them feel important. She crossed her arms. If you and Clara Morrison could get to Pine Creek Station by mid-morning tomorrow, you'd have a chance to present your evidence away from Mercer's eyes. Clara can barely walk, let alone ride for 2 hours. Then you'd better figure out how to make that happen. Martha's voice softened slightly. I liked your brother, Jacob. Daniel was good people. If Mercer killed him, he deserves to hang. But you've got maybe 12 hours before this whole thing goes sideways. Sheriff's planning to form a posse at dawn, head up to your cabin with legal authority to bring you both in dead or alive. Ice settled in my stomach. How do you know that? Because he was here an hour ago, bragging to the judge about how he'd have the criminals in custody by tomorrow night. She moved to her door, opened it quietly, checked the hall. You need to go, now, and Jacob? Yeah. Whatever you decide to do, be careful. Clara Morrison may be brave, but she's not invincible. And neither are you. I slipped on back out the way I'd come, moving through the kitchen and into the muddy creek bed. Martha was right about the watchers. I spotted 2 men lurking in the shadows, clearly waiting for someone to emerge. But they were watching the main path, not the deeper shadows where the creek bent north. I went the other direction, moving slow and silent through the cold water, until I reached the place I'd left Ghost. The big roan gelding greeted me with a soft nicker, and we began the long climb back up the mountain. The cabin was dark when I arrived, but not quiet. I could hear Clara pacing inside, uneven steps punctuated by soft gasps of pain. It's me, I called before opening the door, not wanting to get shot by my own rifle. She was dressed in Sarah's old traveling clothes. Split skirt, practical blouse, sturdy boots, and had clearly been attempting to pack supplies despite her injuries. The carpet bag sat on the table, half filled with food and ammunition. You're back. Relief flooded her face. I was worried, with good reason. We've got problems. I quickly explained what Martha had told me. The judge's route, the posse forming at dawn, the 12-hour window we had to work with. Clara listened without interrupting, her face growing paler with each detail. When I finished, she sat down heavily. Pine Creek Station, by mid-morning, that's, she calculated, 6 hours from now, maybe 7, given the terrain. In your condition. In my condition, she agreed quietly. I don't know if I can do it, Jacob. My head's still spinning. My arm. I know, but it's our only shot. If we wait for that posse to come up here, we'll either die fighting or hang after a trial where Mercer controls all the witnesses. She looked at me with those green eyes, one still half swollen shut, and I saw the fear there. Real, honest fear. Not of Mercer or death or pain, but of failing, of getting this close to justice and watching it slip away because her body couldn't keep up with her determination. I'll make it, she said finally. Get me on a horse, and I'll make it. Clara, your brother died for this. I've bled for this. I'm not stopping now because I'm a little battered. She stood, swaying only slightly. Besides, I've got the best guide in these mountains, don't I? The legendary Jacob Thorne, who hasn't spoken to another human in 8 years but somehow knows every trail and hiding spot in 3 counties? 6 years, I corrected. And I'm not legendary. You saved my life twice. That's pretty legendary from where I'm standing. She managed a small smile. So let's go save both our lives one more time. We left an hour later, in the deepest part of the night when even owls grow quiet. I'd packed Ghost as light as possible, just essential supplies and weapons, and fashioned a sort of sling for Clara's injured arm to keep it stable during the ride. She sat in front of me again, held carefully in place, her body rigid with pain she refused to acknowledge. Tell me if you need to stop, I told her, as we began descending the mountain trail. I won't need to stop. Clara, I said I won't need to stop. Her voice was tight. We've got 6 hours, let's use them. Stubborn woman, brave, brilliant, and stubborn as a Missouri mule. We rode in silence, picking our way down the mountain in darkness. I'd made this trip hundreds of times and knew every rock, every turn, every place where the trail narrowed dangerously. But never at night, never with someone's life depending on me not making a single mistake. The moon helped, a quarter moon, but bright enough to cast shadows. Between that and my knowledge of the trail, we made better time than I'd hoped. By the time the sky started graying toward dawn, we'd reached the valley floor and turned west toward Pine Creek Station. That's when Clara finally spoke. Tell me about your wife. The question caught me off guard. Why? Because I'm sitting here in her clothes, sleeping in her bed, and you've never once complained about it. That's not normal. Most men would be, she paused, searching for words, uncomfortable with the situation. Sarah's been gone 6 years. The clothes weren't doing anyone any good sitting in a trunk. That's not what I asked. No, it wasn't. I rode in silence for a minute, debating whether to answer. Finally, what do you want to know? How'd you meet her? Fort Laramie. I was stationed there after the war, trying to figure out what to do with myself. She was a laundress, daughter of a corporal. We met when I brought in my uniforms, and she told me I tied my boots wrong. I could hear the smile in Clara's voice. Did you? Yeah, I was lacing them cavalry style instead of infantry. She'd grown up around soldiers, knew every regulation by heart. The memory was bittersweet. We got married 3 months later. She followed me when I left the army, never complained about living rough in these mountains. How'd she die? Fever. Came on sudden one spring. I rode down to Redemption for the doctor, but by the time we got back, I paused. She was gone. Just like that. 1 week she was laughing and planting a garden. The next she was in the ground. I'm sorry. Me too. I cleared my throat. She was good people. Would have liked you, I think. You're both the stubborn type who doesn't know when to quit. Clara laughed softly, then gasped as the movement jarred her injuries. Not quitting is basically the only skill I have at this point. We emerged from a stand of pine into more open country, rolling grassland dotted with scrub brush and the occasional cottonwood. The sun was fully up now, painting everything gold. Beautiful country if you ignored the fact that we were running for our lives. What about you, I asked. You said your father was a professor. How'd you end up teaching school in a nowhere town like Redemption? How does anyone end up in a nowhere town? She shifted carefully in the saddle. Bad choices and worse luck. My father died when I was 23, left me with an education, no money, and no marriage prospects. Apparently being able to read Greek doesn't compensate for having no dowry. I taught at a girls' school in Boston for a while, but the head mistress decided I was too modern in my thinking. Meaning? Meaning I thought maybe girls should learn mathematics and science instead of just needlework and French. Scandalous, I know. Her tone was dry. I saw an advertisement for a school teacher in Colorado Territory, offering room and board plus $40 a month. Seemed like an adventure. Seemed like a fresh start. And then you met Dalton Mercer. And then I met Dalton Mercer, she agreed quietly, who seemed charming at first, wealthy, refined, interested in education. He donated money to fix the schoolhouse roof, bought new books for my students. I thought, she trailed off. Thought what? Thought maybe I'd found someone good, someone who'd let me be myself and still care for me. She laughed bitterly. Shows what I know. He wasn't interested in me. He was interested in owning me, like a horse or a fancy painting. Something to show off. When'd you figure out what he really was? First time I saw him hit one of his ranch hands for spilling coffee. Just backhanded him across the face, casual as anything. Then went right back to his conversation like nothing happened. Clara's voice went flat. That's when I knew. Men who hit casually without anger, they're the dangerous ones. The ones who think other people aren't quite human. She was right. I'd seen plenty of men like that in the war. Officers who'd order floggings before breakfast, who'd shoot deserters without a second thought, who'd treat their men like ammunition to be expended. They were the ones who survived longest, ironically. No conscience to slow them down. But you stayed, I said. I stayed because I'd already seen too much. Already knew about some of his business dealings, some of the threats he'd made. If I'd run then, he would have just found me and killed me quietly. Better to stay close, pretend compliance, and plan. She took a careful breath. Besides, your brother was still alive then, still investigating. I thought if I could help him gather evidence, maybe together we could... She stopped abruptly. Could what? I prompted. Could stop Mercer before he hurt anyone else. But we were too slow, too careful. And Daniel, her voice cracked. Daniel trusted people too much. Thought he could confront Mercer directly, get him to confess. I tried to warn him it wouldn't work, but he wouldn't listen. That was Daniel. Always believed people were fundamentally good, even when they proved otherwise. He was kind to me when no one else was, Clara said softly. That matters. We crested a small rise and Pine Creek Station came into view, exactly as Martha had described. Just a barn, a well, and what might have once been a cabin, but was now mostly fallen timbers. Abandoned, isolated, perfect. Also empty. No judge, no wagon, no horses. Are we early? Clara asked, tension creeping into her voice. I checked the sun's position. No, we're right on time. He should be here. We waited 5 minutes, 10, 15. Finally, Clara spoke the fear we were both thinking. What if Martha was wrong? What if the judge changed his route? Or what if Mercer figured out our plan, I said grimly. Martha said there were men watching her boarding house. What if they heard her talking to the judge? What if they warned Mercer? Then we've just wasted 6 hours and our only shot at getting ahead of this. Before I could respond, I heard it. The rattle of wagon wheels, the sound of horses. Relief flooded through me as a covered wagon appeared from the west, driven by a man in a dark suit. Judge Harrison. We were still in this fight. Judge Harrison was not what I expected. I'd imagined someone old, stern, with a white beard and the kind of presence that commanded respect. What I got was a man barely 40, clean-shaven, with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. He pulled his wagon to a stop at the well and climbed down, studying us with the wariness of someone who'd survived on the frontier by assuming everyone was dangerous until proven otherwise. Mr. Thorne, he said, not making it a question. Mrs. Cassidy sent word you might be here. She did? I kept my hand near my rifle, just in case. Woke me at 3 in the morning with a note under my door. Said 2 people with evidence of murder would be waiting at Pine Creek Station, and that I should hear them out before I listened to anything Sheriff Porter had to say. He tied off his horses, moved to the well, began drawing water. I admit, My curiosity is aroused. The sheriff tells me you're a dangerous criminal. Mrs. Cassidy tells me you're Daniel Thorne's brother seeking justice. Which is it? Both, Clara said before I could answer. She slid carefully from the saddle, nearly falling before I caught her. I'm Clara Morrison, and I have evidence that Dalton Mercer murdered Daniel Thorne 3 years ago, among other crimes. Harrison's eyes sharpened as he took in her appearance. The bruises, the splint, the split lip. You're the bride, the one supposedly kidnapped from your own wedding. Not kidnapped, rescued. There's a difference. Tell me that difference. He poured water for his horse, then for us, his movements efficient. And tell me quick. I don't have much time before I'm missed. So we told him. Everything. Clara's 18 months of gathering evidence, the journal she'd copied, the sworn confession from the dying ranch hand, my brother's murder, Mercer's corruption. I showed him the documents we'd brought, watching his face grow progressively more grim as he read. When we finished, he was quiet for a long moment, studying the confession in his hands. This is dynamite, he said finally. If it's real, if it holds up in court, if, Clara's frustration boiled over. Your Honor, I've shown you a signed confession. I've given you Mercer's own journal. I've told you where 3 separate copies of all this evidence are stored. What more do you need? Jurisdiction for one thing. Harrison folded the confession carefully. Murder of a civilian in territorial land falls under local authority first. I can't just ride into redemption and arrest one of the territory's wealthiest men without cause. The confession is cause. The confession is from a dead man. A dying ranch hand with consumption isn't exactly the most reliable witness. He held up a hand to forestall Clara's protest. I'm not saying I don't believe you. I'm saying a defense attorney would tear this apart in 5 minutes. Deathbed confession from a man on laudanum, probably delirious, no other witnesses to corroborate. You see the problem? So we did all this for nothing. Clara's voice went flat. I didn't say that. Harrison pulled out a small notebook, began writing. What I can do is request a federal investigation into Mercer's land dealings. The Territorial Land Office is federal jurisdiction, and you've documented clear evidence of fraud. That gives me authority to detain him pending investigation. Will that hold? I asked. For a few weeks, if I move fast, long enough to dig deeper, interview more people, build a solid case. He tore out the page, handed it to me. This is a writ authorizing federal agents to inspect Mercer's financial records and question his employees. Take it to the territorial marshal in Denver. His name and address are there. He's honest, he's tough, and he owes me a favor. Denver's 3 days ride, Clara protested. We don't have 3 days. You don't have a choice. Harrison's voice was firm, but not unkind. I can't help you more than this. I have no authority to provide protection, no resources to hide you, no ability to arrest Mercer without more evidence. But if you can get to Denver, give that writ to Marshal Davidson. He'll move heaven and earth to make this stick. I looked at the paper in my hand, feeling hope and despair war in my chest. 3 days to Denver. 3 days of riding with Clara, barely able to stay in the saddle. 3 days with Mercer's men hunting us, with a posse maybe already on our trail. But it was something. It was more than we'd had an hour ago. Thank you, I said, extending my hand. Harrison shook it firmly. Thank Daniel. He came to me 2 days before he died, told me he suspected Mercer of corruption. I did not believe him, told him he was seeing shadows where there was only sunlight. If I'd listened, if I'd investigated then, he paused. I can't bring your brother back, but I can make sure his death wasn't meaningless. He climbed back onto his wagon, preparing to leave. Then he turned back. One more thing. Take the mountain route to Denver. The main road will have Mercer's men watching, but there's an old Ute trail that runs north through the high country. Rough going, but it'll get you there unseen if you know what you're doing. I know it. The Ute trail was brutal, narrow, dangerous, with passes that could kill you if the weather turned. But he was right that it would keep us hidden. Good luck, Harrison said. Then softer. You're doing the right thing. Both of you. He drove off, wagon rattling, leaving Clara and me alone in the empty station. 3 days, she said quietly, staring at the mountains to the north. I don't know if I can do 3 days on that trail. Then we'll go slow. Take breaks. Make it work. Jacob, I'm serious. My arm, my head, I'm barely holding together as it is. If something happens, if I slow you down too much, then we'll deal with it. I moved to Ghost, began checking the saddle. You didn't give up when Mercer beat you. Didn't give up when he tried to force you into marriage. Didn't give up during 18 months of gathering evidence. You don't get to give up now. She was quiet for a moment. Then, you're not the silent mountain man everyone thinks you are, you know. You're actually quite bossy. Only when dealing with stubborn women who don't know when to quit. I thought you said that was a good quality. It is, when it doesn't get you killed. We mounted up again, Clara's face tight with pain, and turned toward the mountains. The Ute Trail waited, 3 days of hell stretching ahead of us. But also 3 days that might end with justice, with answers, with Dalton Mercer finally paying for what he'd done, assuming we survived that long. Behind us, faint on the morning air, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Dogs. Mercer had brought tracking dogs. The posse had found our trail faster than I'd expected. How far behind us? Clara asked, hearing it too. Mile, maybe two, hard to say. I urged Ghost faster, knowing even as I did that we couldn't outrun dogs. Not on mountain trails, not with Ghost carrying double weight and Clara injured. We need a different plan, Clara said. Something that doesn't involve outrunning them. She was right. But what? The mountains ahead offered plenty of places to hide, but dogs would find us. We could try to ambush the posse, but we were outnumbered, and Clara couldn't fight effectively. Then I remembered something. A place about an hour north where Pine Creek widened into a shallow river. If we could reach it, if we could cross and ride upstream for a while, we might be able to throw the dogs off our scent. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot we had. Hold on, I told Clara. This is going to be rough. And for the third time in 2 days, I pushed Ghost into a run that might kill us all. The river came into view just as I heard the first shout behind us. Men's voices, close enough to make out words. There, I see them. Ghost plunged into the water without hesitation, the current pulling at his legs. It wasn't deep, maybe 3 feet at most, but it was fast and cold from mountain snowmelt. Clara gasped as water soaked through her boots and split skirt, her injured arm held high to keep it dry. Upstream or down, I asked, already knowing the answer. Upstream. Her voice was tight. Dogs track scent. Water will mask it, but only if we go against the current long enough. Smart woman. I turned Ghost north, following the river as it wound through stands of aspen and willow. The water was rocky, treacherous, Ghost stumbling occasionally on loose stones. But he kept moving, kept pushing, his breathing labored but steady. Behind us, the dogs hit the riverbank, baying in confusion. Good. We had maybe 10 minutes before they figured out which direction we'd gone. We rode upstream for 20 minutes, long enough that my feet were numb and Claire was shaking from cold, before I spotted what I'd been looking for. A side canyon, narrow and steep, with a tiny creek feeding into the main river. It was barely wide enough for a horse, choked with brush and fallen logs. In there, I told Clara, if we can make it up that canyon, we'll come out on a ridge that connects to the Ute Trail. Dogs won't be able to follow on that terrain. And if we can't make it, then we'll die trying. Not the most comforting words I've ever spoken, but Clara just nodded and held tighter to Ghost's mane. The canyon was every bit as brutal as I'd expected. We had to dismount and lead Ghost, scrambling over rocks and deadfall, the tiny creek soaking us further. Clara fell twice, biting back cries of pain, her face pale as parchment. But she got up. Every time, she got up. The climb took an hour of hell during which I was certain the posse would catch us, certain Ghost would break a leg, certain Clara would finally give out. But somehow, impossibly, we reached the top. The ridge stretched before us, a narrow spine of rock connecting 2 mountain peaks. Beyond it, the Ute Trail. Beyond that, Denver and Marshall-Davidson, and maybe, finally, justice. We made it, Clara breathed, leaning against a boulder. Not yet. I helped her mount Ghost again, my own legs shaking from exhaustion. Still 3 days to go. But when I looked back down the canyon, I couldn't see or hear any sign of pursuit. The dogs had lost us. The men would have to guess which way we'd gone, spreading their search thin across dozens of possible routes. We'd bought ourselves time. The Ute Trail was as treacherous as I remembered, a path barely 2 feet wide in places, carved into mountainsides at angles that made ghosts nervous. The pass tops were still snow-covered despite it being September, and the wind cut like knives. But it was beautiful too, in a harsh way. Endless sky, jagged peaks, the kind of silence that made you remember how small you were. Clara dozed against my chest as we rode, exhausted beyond speech. I let her sleep, one arm around her waist to keep her from falling, the other guiding Ghost along the narrow trail. Night fell while we were still high in the mountains. Too dangerous to continue in darkness on this trail. One wrong step would send us tumbling hundreds of feet. I found a small overhang that offered shelter from the wind and made camp. "Where are we?" Clara asked groggily as I helped her down. "Maybe 10 miles in. Good progress for a first day." "Feels like 100 miles. She sat heavily on a flat rock, cradling her injured arm. "How long until Denver?" "If we maintain this pace, 2 more days, maybe 3. "And if we don't?" I didn't answer, just set about building a small fire. Risky, but we needed warmth or Clara would go hypothermic. I'd packed blankets and food, and I made her eat despite her protests. "I'm not hungry." "Don't care. Eat anyway. You need strength." "Bossy," she muttered, but took the jerky and hardtack I handed her. We ate in silence while the fire crackling, stars emerging in the enormous sky overhead. Down in the valley, I could see distant lights. Redemption, probably, or one of the other small towns. Our world seemed very far away from those lights, like we'd climbed into a different reality entirely. "Tell me something," Clara said after a while. "If we make it to Denver, if Marshal Davidson arrests Mercer, if everything works out, what then?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what happens to you? To me? Do we just—" She gestured vaguely. "Go back to our lives? Pretend none of this happened?" I poked at the fire, thinking. Don't know if there's a life to go back to. My cabin's probably burned by now. You can't teach school in a town where you're famous for running out on Dalton Mercer. So we're both refugees. Guess so. That's not an answer to my question. She looked at me across the fire, her bruised face serious in the flickering light. What happens to us, Jacob? The question hung in the cold mountain air, heavy with implications I wasn't sure I was ready to examine. In the 2 days, we'd gone from strangers to something else entirely. Partners, laolais, maybe more, though I wasn't ready to name it. I don't know, I said honestly. Haven't thought past getting you to Denver alive. Well, start thinking, because I don't have anywhere to go after this. No family, no job, no prospects. And I'd rather not end up teaching school in some other nowhere town where some other Dalton Mercer decides I'm his property. She was right to plan ahead, right to think about the future. But I'd spent so many years not planning, not thinking beyond the next season, that the concept felt foreign. Stay, I heard myself say, after this is done. Stay with me. Clara blinked. Stay with you where? You just said your cabin's probably burned. Then we'll build another one farther up the mountain, more hidden. I stopped, realizing how insane this sounded. Sorry, that was stupid. You don't want to live on a mountain with a man you barely know. Don't I? She tilted her head, considering. Jacob, in 2 days, you've saved my life 3 times. Ridden into danger for me, treated me with more respect and kindness than any man I've known in years. You've listened to me, believed me, helped me. That's not nothing. It's not a marriage proposal either. Who said anything about marriage? But her lips quirked in something that might have been a smile. I'm just saying, after this is done, if we both survive, maybe we don't have to go our separate ways. Maybe we could figure out what comes next together. Together, I repeated, testing the word. Unless you prefer your solitude. I'd understand. You spent 8 years building that solitude, and I crashed into it like a runaway wagon. 6 years, I corrected automatically. And you didn't crash. You were thrown. Big difference. So is that a yes to staying? I looked at her, this brave, brilliant, broken woman who'd risked everything for justice, who'd spent 18 months planning to take down a monster, who'd kept fighting despite injury and fear and exhaustion, who made me want to speak more than 10 words a day for the first time in years. Ask me again when we reach Denver, I said, when this is over, when you've had time to think about what you really want instead of just surviving. Fair enough. Clara wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders. But for the record, I already know what I want. She didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask, because some things were better left unspoken until the time was right. We slept in shifts that night, one of us always awake and watching for signs of pursuit. But the mountains stayed quiet, and when dawn broke cold and clear, we were still alone. 2 more days to Denver. We could do this. The second day on the Ute Trail nearly killed us both. We woke to find the temperature had dropped during the night, and a thin layer of ice covered everything. Worse, Clara's fever had spiked. When I touched her forehead, it was burning hot despite the mountain cold. I'm fine, she insisted, teeth chattering. Just cold. Let's keep moving. You're not fine. You're sick. I dug through our supplies, cursing my lack of preparation. I had whiskey for disinfecting wounds, but nothing for fever. No willow bark, no medicine, nothing. The wrist, I realized, carefully unwrapping her splint. The skin around the break had turned red and swollen, angry looking. It's infected. Must have gotten dirty water in it when we crossed the river. Can you fix it? Clara asked, her voice small. I can try, but infection in a broken bone was serious. Without proper medicine, without a doctor, it could turn bad fast. I cleaned the area as best I could with whiskey, ignoring Clara's screams of pain, and rewrapped it tightly. We need to get you to Denver fast, to a real doctor. How fast? 1 more day if we push hard. Maybe less if the trail is clear. We pushed hard. Ghost sensed the urgency, moving as fast as the terrain allowed. We descended from the high passes into slightly lower elevations where the air was thicker and the cold less brutal. But Clara grew worse as we rode, drifting in and out of consciousness, mumbling things that didn't make sense. Hold on, I told her again and again. Just hold on a little longer. By afternoon, we'd covered maybe 15 miles. Good progress, but not enough. Clara was burning up, shaking so hard I could feel it through her clothes. The infected wrist had swollen to nearly twice its normal size, and red streaks were starting to appear on her forearm. Blood poisoning. If we didn't get her to a doctor soon, she'd die. Talk to me, I said, trying to keep her conscious. Clara, tell me about Boston. Tell me about your father. Cold, she mumbled. So cold. I know. Stay with me. Tell me about teaching, about your students. Taught them numbers, letters, little girls who wanted to learn. She laughed weakly. Their mothers thought I was corrupting them, teaching them to think. Good, that's good. Keep talking. But she couldn't. Her eyes rolled back, and she went limp against my chest. Clara. I shook her gently. Clara, wake up. Nothing. She was still breathing, but barely. Still alive, but slipping away. I did something then that I hadn't done in 6 years. I prayed. Please don't let her die. Not like this. Not after everything she's survived. Please. The trail descended into a valley as the sun began to set. And there, like a miracle, I saw smoke rising in the distance. A settlement. Maybe just a mining camp. Maybe something bigger. But it meant people. It meant help. I pushed Ghost into a dangerous run, racing against time and fever and the approaching night. The settlement grew closer. A real town, maybe 50 buildings, with lights glowing in windows. Help! I shouted as we thundered into the main street. I need a doctor! Now! People emerged from buildings, staring at the wild-looking man on the exhausted horse, carrying an unconscious woman. Someone pointed toward a building at the end of the street, a sign reading, Dr. Samuel Chen, physician. I didn't bother dismounting properly, just half fell off Ghost and carried Clara to the door, kicking it open. I need help. She's got blood poisoning, infected broken wrist, fever. A man looked up from a desk, Chinese, middle-aged with calm, intelligent eyes. Bring her here, quickly. Dr. Chen cleared a table with one sweep of his arm and took over, his movements precise and practiced. He cut away Clara's bandages, examined the wrist, checked her pupils and pulse. "How long has she been like this?" he asked. "Fever started this morning, got worse during the day. The infection's advanced. I'll need to drain the wound, probably reset the bone. It's badly positioned. She'll need laudanum, antibiotics, rest." He looked at me seriously. "Is someone chasing you? Is that why you're riding so hard?" I hesitated, but this man was trying to save Clara's life. He deserved honesty. "Yes, we have evidence of murder and corruption. Men are after us. We need to reach Denver, to a federal marshal." Dr. Chen nodded as if this were perfectly normal. "Denver is 6 hours from here. You can make it by dawn if you leave within the hour. But she cannot travel like this. She needs to stay here. Recover." "No." The word came out harsh. "They'll find her. They'll kill her." "Then hide her. I have a back room where I keep my supplies. No one will look there." He was already working as he spoke, cleaning Clara's wound with practiced efficiency. "You go to Denver. Get your marshal. Come back for her when it's safe." "I'm not leaving her." "You don't have a choice." Dr. Chen's voice was gentle but firm. "Look at her. She cannot ride another 6 hours. She will die if you try. But if you leave her here with me, I can save her. And you can save yourself by getting that evidence to someone who can stop whoever is chasing you." He was right, and I hated it. Hated every word. But he was right. I looked at Clara's pale face, listened to her labored breathing. Leaving her felt like tearing out my own heart. But staying meant we both died. "Save her," I said, my voice rough. "Whatever it costs, save her." "I will." Dr. Chen met my eyes. "I promise." I wrote down Marshall Davidson's name and address in Denver, pressed it into the doctor's hand along with most of my remaining money. "If something happens to me, if I don't come back, give her this. Make sure she gets to the marshal." Then I did the hardest thing I'd ever done. I walked out of that doctor's office, climbed onto Ghost, and rode away from the woman I'd spent 2 days protecting. 6 hours to Denver, 6 hours to find Marshall Davidson, 6 hours to hope that Mercer's men didn't find Clara first, that Dr. Chen kept his word, that I hadn't just signed her death warrant by leaving her behind. The night was cold and clear, stars bright overhead. Ghost ran like his life depended on it, maybe sensing my desperation, maybe just knowing that after this run, he'd finally get to rest. And I prayed. For Clara, for justice, for my brother who died trying to do the right thing, for all of us who'd gotten caught up in Dalton Mercer's web of corruption and violence. Denver's lights appeared on the horizon just as false dawn started graying the sky. Marshall Davidson was a hard man with kind eyes, the sort who'd seen too much darkness but never let it kill the light in him. He listened to my story without interrupting, read Judge Harrison's writ, examined the documents I'd carried from Clara's carpet bag. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Dalton Mercer," he finally said. "I've heard rumors about him for years. Never had enough evidence to move. You're telling me this woman gathered it all? Risked everything? She's in a doctor's office 6 hours south of here, dying from infections she got while running from his men. And if I don't get back there soon, you'll get back." Davidson stood, began issuing orders to deputies. "I'll take 6 men to redemption. We'll arrest Mercer, secure his property, gather additional evidence. You take 2 men and go get your woman. Bring her here safely." Your woman, the phrase stuck with me. "She's not," I started, then stopped. Wasn't sure how to finish that sentence. Davidson smiled knowingly. "Son, I've been doing this job for 20 years. I know what a man looks like when he's found something worth fighting for. Go get her." The ride back to Dr. Chen's office took 5 hours with fresh horses. Every minute felt like an eternity. Every mile made me more certain I'd find her dead, that Mercer's men had somehow found her, that I'd left her to die alone. But when we burst through the doctor's door, Clara was there, alive, awake, and looking considerably better than when I'd left her. "You came back," she said, her voice weak but clear. "Of course I came back." I crossed to her in 3 strides, took her good hand in mine. "How are you?" "Dr. Chen says I'll live. The fever broke last night. The infection's clearing. She gestured at her resplinted wrist. He had to re-break it to set it properly. I screamed a lot. He's very patient. Dr. Chen appeared from his back room, nodded at me. She'll recover fully. Another week of rest, and she can travel safely. We don't have a week. You have as long as you need, one of Davidson's deputies interrupted. Marshall sent word an hour ago. Dalton Mercer is under arrest. His ranch is being searched. Several of his men have already started talking, offering testimony in exchange for leniency. Clara's eye, the one that wasn't still swollen, went wide. It's over? The arrest part is over, the deputy confirmed. The trial will take months, but Mercer isn't getting out. Marshall made sure of that. Clara started crying, huge gasping sobs that shook her whole body. I sat beside her, carefully put my arm around her shoulders, let her cry against my chest. These weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of release, of finally being able to stop running. Your brother, she managed between sobs. He'll have justice. Finally. Because of you, I told her. Daniel would be grateful. Hell, I'm grateful. She pulled back, looked at me with those green eyes that had first caught my attention in that church. So what happens now? Now you rest. Heal properly. When you're ready to travel, we'll go to Denver. You'll need to give testimony, help build the case. And after that, I remembered our conversation on the mountain, her question about what came next, my half answer about building a new cabin. After that, I said slowly, I figure I need to build a new place, somewhere more hidden, somewhere with room for two. Two, she repeated, something like hope flickering across her face. If you want, no pressure, no obligation, just two people who survived something terrible, figuring out how to live with what comes next. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then, I want, but I have conditions. Such as? I'm not going to be some silent mountain wife who just cooks and cleans. I'll want books. I'll want to maybe start a school again for the miners' children in the area. I'll want to be a partner, not property. I wouldn't have it any other way. I managed a small smile, the first real one in days. Besides, you're too stubborn to be silent. And you're too bossy to let anyone be silent around you anyway. We sat there for a while, holding hands like teenagers, talking about the future, about the cabin we'd build, bigger than my old one, with room for a proper library and a space for students, about how we'd testify at Mercer's trial, about the long process of healing, both physical and emotional. Dr. Chen brought tea and told us stories about his own journey west, about persecution he'd faced, about the community he'd built here, about the importance of standing up for what's right even when it's dangerous. 2 weeks later, Dalton Mercer stood trial in Denver. The courtroom was packed, everyone wanting to see the mighty rancher brought low. Clara testified for 3 hours, her voice clear and unwavering, describing every crime she'd documented. The jury took 20 minutes to find him guilty on all counts. Judge Harrison himself handed down the sentence. Life in federal prison, all property seized and sold to compensate Mercer's victims. The judge looked Mercer in the eye and said, "You had every advantage, wealth, education, opportunity. You used it all to cause suffering. That is the greatest crime of all." Claire and I were there for the sentencing. Afterward, we walked out into Denver sunshine, breathing free air for the first time in what felt like forever. "It's really over," Clara said wonderingly. "The trial's over," I corrected. "We still have to figure out the rest." "I thought we already did. New cabin, school, partnership." "I meant this." I stopped walking, turned to face her. "Clara Morrison, you drove into my life like a tornado, turned everything upside down, and made me remember what it's like to care about something other than survival. I don't have much to offer, just a mountain, some building skills, and a tendency towards silence. But if you'll have me—" "Yes," she interrupted. "Whatever you're asking, yes." "I haven't asked yet. Don't care. Still yes." So I kissed her, right there in the middle of Denver, in front of Del and everyone. And for the first time in 8 years, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I'd found home again. We built a new cabin that fall, high on the mountain where the aspens turned gold and the wind sang through the pines. It took 4 months of hard work, but when we finished, it was perfect, warm, solid, Hours. Clara started her school the following spring. 14 students from 3 mining camps, all eager to learn. She taught them reading, writing, mathematics, and most importantly, to think for themselves. I hunted, trapped, built furniture, and discovered I didn't mind talking when Clara was around. She had a way of drawing words out of me, of making silence comfortable rather than oppressive. We married quietly that summer, just us and Dr. Chen and Martha Cassidy as witnesses. No fancy ceremony, no crowds, just promises made in a mountain meadow with wildflowers and sunshine as decoration. It wasn't a perfect life. Clara's wrist never healed quite right. It ached in cold weather, and she couldn't carry heavy things. The nightmares came sometimes, dreams of Dalton Mercer and that terrible wedding. I'd wake to find her trembling, and I'd hold her until the fear passed. But it was a good life, an honest life, one built on survival and stubbornness and the strange miracle of two broken people finding each other in the worst possible circumstances. My brother Daniel would have liked Clara, I think, would have appreciated her courage, her intelligence, her refusal to be cowed by men who thought power gave them the right to hurt others. And maybe, in some small way, the justice she'd won for him let his spirit rest. As for me, I learned that silence isn't always peace, and that sometimes the greatest strength is allowing yourself to be vulnerable, to care, to love, even when, especially when it scares you half to death.